Dear Professor Levy, I'm very honored and very happy to have you here. I'm also planning to feature you more in the paper. And for the beginning, I would like to know when was the first time you came to work for projects in the southern Levant, particularly in Israel and Jordan.
Okay, so the first time that I came to the Middle East was in 1971. I was 17 years old, and I went on a biblical archaeology excavation in Israel at a place called Tel Gezer. It was run originally by Nelson Glick, who was a very famous American archaeologist who had done pioneer work in Jordan from the early 1930s to 1947. And then he moved over to Israel after Israel's independence war, the Nakba,
Exactly. Yeah,
and so he could no longer work in Jordan, so he decided to start doing surveys in the southern Negev desert. And then, as the president of the Hebrew Union College, which is an American institution situated in Cincinnati, he started a major international project in the mid 1960s at Tel Gezer. And when I was a kid, and I wrote to him asking if I could be on his excavation. And I got about a week later, I got a letter from one of his associates saying, "We're very sorry, but Professor Glick passed away, but you're welcome to come on the excavation." And so I went in 1971, and the new director of the whole project was William Deaver, Professor William Deaver, who at that time, he worked in Jerusalem at the Hebrew Union College. The Hebrew Union College had a biblical archaeology program there, and he was the director. He later became the director of what we now call the Albright Institute of Archaeological Research in East Jerusalem. And so I had that experience, and Professor Deaver, if you haven't interviewed him, I would urge you to do so. He's now 90 years old, but he's still a dynamo, and he was an exceptional lecturer, and his lecture really got me excited about the archaeology of the Holy Land.
What was the state of biblical archaeology back then compared to what we have today? Because
Oh,
so
that's a
many
really
projects, so many projects were
yeah, that's a really good
started at that
question.
time.
The state of biblical archaeology was in the 1960s and up to the 1970s. There was a very literal interpretation of
Yeah.
the Bible and archaeology, and that people would say, archaeologists like William Foxwell Albright, um, uh, uh, Wright from Harvard, and Professor Glick, they had the Bible in one hand and the trowel in the other, right? And they really thought that they took a literal interpretation of the historical aspects of the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. And through that lens, and there were others like famous biblical archaeologists like Professor Yigal Yadin, who was an Israeli archaeologist. They thought you could use the Bible as like a roadmap to understanding the past. And Professor Deaver actually changed that to a great degree, because he started to call biblical archaeology, he started to call it Syro-Palestinian archaeology. For many years. He called it Syro-Palestinian. Now, today, let's fast forward, say, the last 20 years, I would say most scholars now refer to it as Levantine archaeology, the archaeology of the southern Levant. And that's a more kind of ecumenical, because you could call it Palestinian archaeology, you could call it Israeli archaeology.
Yeah, but we're talking about the same territory. Technically,
we're talking about the same territory.
Exactly.
We're talking about the same territory, and I prefer to use the term Levantine archaeology because everybody can kind of get their mind around it.
Of course. And the border changed many times during the ancient period, not the modern day period, and it would be very wrong to project all the conflicts and collaboration with the modern day political collaboration.
That's right.
Or political strifes. It's totally wrong to equate even populations of modern day Levant with populations of ancient Levant, including Arabs.
Yeah, I mean, we have to think of it as it is a unique geographic region. It's the land bridge between Africa and Southwest Asia. And as you say, the modern, and historical boundaries, they change all the time.
Of course.
The boundaries, they changed in biblical times.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And yeah, I agree.
It was a buffer zone between ancient Egypt and Mesopotamian powers for most of the time. And how difficult is for modern day archaeologists and researchers is to travel between West Bank and East Bank? Do you face any obstacle?
Well,
as a researcher?
to be honest, I haven't worked in the West Bank or Judea, Samaria, whatever you want to call it.
Exactly.
So I can't really answer that question. I can answer, the question about working in the state of Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan, and the state of Israel. It's not a problem. Yeah, if you want to know more, I'm happy to discuss it.
When did you start working in Wadi Fainan? Because you're well known, and through my personal contacts and contacts of my friends who are also researchers, like Mohammed Najjar or Ian Jones, who spoke here also 4 or 5 times. I know that you were very involved with Wadi Fainan. How it started?
Okay, so it started in 1996. I had worked previously in Israel for 20 years, okay? And then in 1996, it was only 2 years after the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan. It was a very kind of euphoric period. People were very excited. And Dr. Pierre Bakai, who was the director of ACOR in Amman, Jordan, came with Amar Hamash, who was he is a very famous Jordanian architect. He does beautiful ecologically sensitive projects. They came to Israel to plan a joint Jordanian-Israeli tourism project around the Dead Sea. And at the time, I was digging at an early Bronze Age Chalcolithic site on a kibbutz in Israel's northern Negev desert called Kibbutz Lahav. And one day in the dining room, a friend of mine came and said, "Oh, there's these guys from Jordan are here, Pierre Bakai, would you like to meet them for lunch?" So they came, this is in the dining room of the kibbutz, and we had lunch. And then afterwards I said to Pierre, "Would you like to visit our site?" And then I gave them a tour of the site. And after the tour, Pierre said to me, "You know what? You should dig in Jordan." And I said, "Well, I would love to." I said, "I can speak some Arabic because I learned Arabic along the way." And I said, I would love to, but I've never been there. And he said, "If you come and you rent a Jeep, I will drive you all over Jordan and you pick where you want to work. And then we'll go meet the director of the Department of Antiquities of Jordan." So I said, "Okay." So I made my way to Jordan. The minute I went over the border on the King Hussein Bridge, I felt at home. I mean, I could speak Arabic pretty good. And Israel and Jordan are actually very similar, I mean,
Absolutely. I'm coming from Europe, and for me, both places are desert. Really, literally. For me, when I hear people from the West Bank making fun of East Bankers that they live in a more desolated area, it sounds weird to me because I'm coming from more forested area. So both places, West Bank and East Bank, especially Judea and Samaria, are very arid areas.
Yeah,
I mean the same areas. They're literally the same.
The people are very similar. Like people are friendly, and the food is similar. So it was all good. And so Pierre and I, we went all over, and then he drove me to Feinan, and we drove from the plateau. In those days, we were able to actually drive all the way down from the plateau through the Wadi Feinan to Wadi Fidan. And I was very interested in Feinan because in my excavations of Chalcolithic, that is Copper Age sites in the Negev desert of Israel, we had done chemical analyses and some lead isotope analyses of the copper ore and the copper metal that we found in these sites in the Negev desert. And it all pointed that the origin was 150 kilometers away in the Feinan area of southern Jordan. So I was attracted to work in Jordan, because I found it very exciting, because southern Jordan in many respects was like terra incognita, a kind of unknown. There just wasn't as much field work done there as in Israel.
Absolutely.
And so this is a great opportunity. So we went after the tour to meet Dr. Ghazi Bisha. He passed away a couple of years ago.
He recently passed away, unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, it's a real loss. He was an expert on Islamic archaeology. He had gotten his PhD at the University of Michigan. So we go into his office, we have coffee, and he says, "Okay, where do you want to work?" And I said, "Well, Feinan." So he said, "Sure." I said, "Well, wait a minute, Ghazi. I worked in Israel for 20 years. Is that going to be a problem?" And Ghazi said, "Mafi mushkala, faddal."
Of course.
And please, you're welcome. And I worked, and so I worked there in Jordan in the field for about 18 years with Dr. Mohammed Najjar. And Mohammed and I did amazing work together. We worked on sites from from the Neolithic, pre-pottery Neolithic and Chalcolithic, early Bronze Age, up to the Iron Age, and then on to late medieval Islamic period sites, all exploring how societies change through the lens of copper production through time. And it's been wonderful.
Wadi Fainan was a well-known copper mining site in Iron Age, and how it was interconnected with Negev, because geographically it's the same area.
Yeah, so if you if you look at the deep time history of copper production in Fainan, and that means even from the days of just collecting raw copper in the pre-pottery Neolithic to use as beads or to grind it up as a coloring, that kind of thing. If you look at all the different periods, including the Iron Age and the Islamic period, the Roman period and the Islamic period, the peak of all that copper production is actually in the Iron Age, in the biblical times. So I always say that during the Iron Age, the first industrial revolution in the southern Levant was actually in the Iron Age. And now through our work in Fainan, we know that there were specifically 2 centuries, like a 200-year period from 1000 BCE to about 800 BCE. That was the peak of copper production. And I could tell you that they were, I have the data. Let me just look 1 second. I have a nice chart, but I don't know if you want me to share it, but is this just recorded from audio?
It's recorded visually and as audio. So
okay.
we will have both video and audio.
Well, if you want me, I could show you a slide.
Yeah,
if
please
you
go
want.
ahead.
All right, so let's see. You have to enable me to share.
I have to, yes, so I have to go to share screen.
Okay.
Multiple participants. I think now you can try to share.
Okay. Beautiful, beautiful. That's gonna do it.
Yeah.
Okay, now you can see my slides,
Yeah.
right? Great. So we'll just enlarge that. So look at this. This work was done by my colleague, Professor Andreas Hauptmann of the German Mining Museum, the Deutsche Bergbau Museum in Germany. And so you have to understand that in Fainan, it was first really noted as an important area for copper by the Czech Orientalist Alois Musil in the late 1890s. Okay, he did a survey of the area, and then Nelson Glick came, who I mentioned earlier, in the 1930s, and digging, but he made more deep. And then in the Andreas Hauptmann, who's a geologist, an archaeometallurgist, he went to Fainan to really study the history of technology.
Yeah, we are back.
Okay, we're back. We're
Yeah,
back.
yeah, we're back.
That's okay. So Andreas worked as a geologist, did. He wasn't really interested in the context of metal production in these societies. He would go to a slag mound from different periods, make a section, you know what I mean? A
Yeah.
cross section, and extract samples. So then comes 1997. Mohammed and I and some other colleagues, Russell Adams, my idea was we're going to make large scale excavations and we're going to understand the social context of metal production at these sites through time. So, so that's what that's our big contribution. The largest and most detailed excavations of these sites in Fainan, excluding the early prehistory when other scholars did that, but from the Neolithic, early bronze, Chalcolithic, early bronze, etc. It's our project. It's the Edom Lowlands Regional Archaeology Project that was a collaborative between the University of California, San Diego, and the Jordan Department of Antiquities. And at the time, when we started, Dr. Najjar was the director of excavations and surveys in the Department of Antiquities of Jordan. But Andreas built a beautiful foundation for all of our work when it comes to studying the metal production. So he did estimates of the amount of copper that would have been produced, okay?
Yeah.
And how do you figure that out? You quantify the amount of slag, that is the waste products of the smelting activities to, you know, where you crush the copper ore and then you put it in a furnace and put blowpipes into it or tuyères, and you create this this reaction that extracts the metal, but you're left with all the junk. The
Of
junk
course.
is black slag. And so here you see the amount of slag. Over here you have the periods. So
Yeah.
if we look at the early Bronze Age sites, early Bronze II in Fainan, there's about 5,000 tons of slag estimated on the surface of those sites. And there's about a 10-to-1 ratio of slag to the amount of copper that was produced.
Yeah.
So you have about 300 to 500 tons of copper metal produced in the early Bronze Age. But look what happens in the following Iron Age or biblical period, which is, say, 1200 BCE to 586 BCE. We have over 100,000 tons of slag over the landscape. And that means that during the Iron Age, they were producing between 6,500 to 13,000 tons of copper metal. I mean, just think of that. You know, imagine you have like a few pieces of copper in the circuit board of your phone. Imagine a ton of copper, what you do with that. So here we are, 13,000 tons. Now we go to the Roman period when Fainan was part of the Eastern Empire of Rome. And they would, like by the end of the Roman period, when Christianity started, the Romans were like shipping what they viewed as criminals and so
Absolutely,
on.
yeah. It was a penal colony there.
Yeah, it was a penal colony, exactly. But look, Saeed, they were only producing 40,000 to 70,000 tons of slag, or 2,500 to 7,000 tons of metal. Okay, that's a lot, but look, it's amazing that in this biblical period, it's the peak of production. And then in Islamic times, this was a real marginal area, only 100 to 150 tons of this. And if Ian Jones spoke to you, Ian Jones was my student, you know. He did his PhD with me, and he focused on the Islamic period as part of our Edom Lowlands Regional Archaeology Project. So that kind of paints the picture that this period, what Andreas couldn't tell you here is the nuances and how exactly copper production changed at the end of the late Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age, and then how it ended. And our work has contributed to almost a decadal story. Every decade, we can trace how copper production changed in Fainan. It's amazing.
What do you think was the cause for the drop in copper production? If we compare, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, here we're just looking at Khirbet an-Nahas in the background, a video. It's based on a 3D model that another one of my former graduate students, Matt Howland, built. And this is a fly-through of Khirbet an-Nahas. And you can see all the black slag on the surface. And the that's the fortress over there on the right. It's one of the biggest Iron Age fortresses in the deserts of southern Jordan, Israel, Egypt. And over here is the slag. You know, the site has tens of slag mounds, huge mounds of slag. We picked one and excavated it as a sample, you know, just to go down. And we took it, that square, all the way to bedrock. And we had over 6.5 meters of slag from the surface going all the way down to virgin soil. It was amazing. So the peak of copper production, as I mentioned, is the 10th and 9th centuries BCE. And then at the end of the 9th century, around 800, it collapses. The industry collapses. Why? You asked that question.
Yeah.
And I think, well, first of all, we have to ask ourselves, why did it start? You know? And for that, we have to go to the end of the late Bronze Age. And let me just go here. Oh, it doesn't matter. Basically, oh, here it is. Yeah, this is a good slide. Let me just move, oops, let me move you and me up here.
Okay.
And blow this up. Okay, so during the late Bronze Age, the end of the Middle Bronze Age, the late Bronze Age, in the Eastern Mediterranean, the center of copper production was the island of Cyprus. I mean, even the name Kypros, it's related to the root word for copper.
Yeah.
And so that was the center, and they cranked out, you know, I don't know how much, but you know, there are shipwrecks that have been found near Turkey, the Ulu Barun shipwreck, which has many, many tons of copper ingots. You know, they look like oxhide from a cow. You know, if you dried a cow, the skin of a cow, you'd have oxide. So they call them oxide ingots, and they weigh about 70 kilos each. And they found underwater this like amazing number of these ingots. And they all came from the island of Cyprus. So that's a great example of how across the Mediterranean, the Cypriots were cranking out copper and sending it by ship all over the place. But then at the end of the late Bronze Age, we don't know why, but all the civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BC, they collapsed, and I'm talking about Mycenaean Greece, the Hittites of Anatolia, and the New Kingdom of Egypt.
Yeah.
And remember, New Kingdom of Egypt, they had established a colonial operation in the southern Levant, in Palestine, Israel, Jordan.
Absolutely.
And so
it was their turf at that time.
Exactly. And now 1200 BCE, boom, it all collapses. Why? And I have a number of reasons here. One might be climate change. Another are mass migration and pandemics. Another might be warfare. Another is the inability of humans to adapt to crises. And then there's poor leadership on the part of the ruling elites. Doesn't that sound familiar today?
Well, it sounds familiar, although I doubt that we're going to have a such massive collapse like in the end of the Bronze Age.
You know what we say in Arabic? Inshallah.
Inshallah, of course.
Inshallah.
Usually when you don't want to do things immediately or you want to procrastinate any action, you say the magic word inshallah. I'm going to send you now the second link because in 2-3 minutes this one is going to expire, and in 10 minutes yeah, we'll take a break. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm going to send you another link.
See you in a minute.
See you in a few minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
We were talking about the collapse of the Bronze Age, the collapse of civilization in 12 BCE, and what were potential causes of that. So please go ahead and continue with the conversation.
So the collapse of late Bronze Age civilization, it was, civilizations have collapsed regularly through history. And in the Middle East, there was also a big social collapse at the end of the early Bronze Age. But our story here is about what happens at the end of the late Bronze Age. And so up to about 1200 BC, the main motor of copper production, as I mentioned, was the island of Cyprus. And then for whatever reasons, we talked about climate change, we talked about social crises because of mass migration, pandemics, warfare, poor leadership, poor national leadership. It all probably worked together. You probably can't say one reason. All those factors, it's a multi-causal thing, but the Mycenaean civilization collapsed, the Hittites collapsed, New Kingdom Egypt collapsed. What that did for the people of the southern Levant is it gave a power vacuum, and it gave an opportunity for smaller groups of people like the ancient Israelites, like the ancient Moabites, the Edomites in Jordan, the modern day Jordan, the Midianites in Northwest Arabia, the Hijaz region of Saudi Arabia, the Philistines on the coastal of the Mediterranean in Israel, Gaza area, and the Phoenicians off the coast of modern day Lebanon. All those little societies in the Iron Age became, stronger. And each one of those had their own reasons for being able to grow, but part of it is the social collapse, the power vacuum. And in Edom, in Jordan, because the copper industry was down in Cyprus, it gave the Edomites a unique opportunity to harness copper production and became a major supplier of copper in the 10th and 9th centuries to Egypt and to other places in the Eastern Mediterranean. Okay. And then we can see that, for example, let's see, I think I got a picture here. Yeah, here's a nice picture. This is a underwater archaeologist in Israel. His name's Udi Galili. He's one of the pioneers of underwater archaeology in the Eastern Mediterranean. And in the 1980s, he found a shipwreck south of Haifa at a place called Neve Yam, where he found 54 copper ingots, and pottery and so on that show that it came from the Iron Age. And when they did lead isotope analyses of the copper, they found that it matched with phenon. So it's even possible that these are the actual ingots that were produced in phenon. They were traded across the deserts of the southern Levant to coastal places like Tel Dor or other ports along the Mediterranean coast of Palestine, Israel. And then the ship went down. And luckily, not for those sailors, those Iron Age sailors, but for us archaeologists, we have these products that show how copper was traded from Phenon overland to the coast and then to other regions. Now, at the end of the Iron Age, around 800 BCE, Phenon, copper production there kind of it disappears. And what happens, like this is the picture of the map of Phenon. So if we go up here, we see the Israel, the Palestine Authority, Jordan. Here, this square is Phenon, and that square is what we're looking at here. And this map we made highlights all the major Iron Age copper production sites, like Khibet al-Nahas here, the ruins of copper, Khibet al-Gueba over here on the Wadi al-Gueba, and Khibet al-Jariya, which is this is about 2.5 kilometers north of Khibet al-Nahas on the Wadi Jariya, al-Jariya. These yellow numbers, by the way, are the number of high precision radiocarbon dates processed from these sites. So we did an unprecedented number of radiocarbon dates from Khibet al-Nahas, 118. These things are expensive, you see. Like over here, here's our project. We did 135 radiocarbon dates. The British did 7. The Germans did 20. And this, by using all those radiocarbon dates, we can control time and measure how fast things change in the Iron Age. And by we know that by the end of the, and here you can just see, before our work, the Iron Age in Fainan was thought to end around 800 BC.
Mhm.
But we've extended the chronology all the way
For
to
another
the,
500-600 years.
yep,
Yeah,
yep. And so
another
now
500 years.
yeah, we can talk about, what happened during the collapse. This is where the collapse of civilizations appeared,
Yeah.
and then we see a very long Iron Age occupation in Fainan. Well, by 800, they stopped producing copper, and we don't know exactly why, but we do know that these sites, these are, by the way, these crossed axes are where the mines are. There are hundreds of mines in these areas here and these areas here, here. There's probably over 1,000 mines in
These mines
Fainan.
and pits had a bad reputation during Roman and Byzantine time and during the penal colony time, because
Yes,
people were taken as slaves to work in deep pits.
that's right. But to go back to our story,
Mm,
we don't have a definitive answer, but what happened was probably the island of Cyprus rebounded again, and they started to produce copper, and they reassumed their dominant role in the production and distribution of copper at the in the later part of the Iron Age, the end of the Iron Age.
yes.
But the people of Fainan, and we know this from the pottery that we studied at these sites, all the types of Iron Age Edomite pottery that is famous on the plateau area of Edom, like the Shara Mountains, where
Yeah,
Petra's located.
of course. Petra is not far
I
away from Wadi Fainan.
exactly like okay, here's a good map. So if we look at this, so prior to our work, all the main Iron Age sites that were investigated were on the plateau region of Edom, okay, of biblical Edom. Sites like Tawilan, El Biara, etc. Busera, that was the capital of Edom. And prior to our work, archaeologists thought that the Iron Age only began around, in the 700s, 600s BC. You see, people
Yeah.
like Piotr Bienkowski and his teacher, Crystal Bennett, from those excavations. But when we excavated in the lowlands of Edom, 25 kilometers from these sites down the hill,
Mhm.
it's not far,
Yeah.
we found that all the pottery types that were defined up here have their roots several hundred centuries earlier in Fainan, you see.
Yeah.
And then when the copper production ceased, those people left the areas of the Wadi Araba, and they moved up on the plateau, and they started to build permanent settlements, like at El Biara in Petra,
Petra area,
right?
yes.
Like if you've been to Petra, the Temple of the Winged Lions,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, it's close to Byzantine Church. It's in the
Yes.
same vicinity of Petra.
So if you just hike there, you'll see this mountain on the right.
Absolutely, yeah.
This is called El Biara, where Crystal Bennett excavated. And then there's a beautiful causeway that leads up to the top. Here's a friend of mine, Chip Stanish, for scale. And then you get up on the top, this is me, you have the excavations of Crystal Bennett. So all the pottery types that she found here and at other excavations on the plateau originate, the styles are all at the lowlands of Edom from several centuries earlier. We published all this. So so at the end of the Iron Age, maybe the Edomites stopped producing metal, but they really got into the trade business. And these sites are on the King's Highway, what
King's Highway, yes.
became the King's Highway and all of that. And they became very important traders and business people in that sense. So they left the metal trade behind, but they got into something else. So that's sort of where we are with regard to the question of why the copper production stopped in Fainan at the end of around 800 BC in Fainan.
If you don't want to add anything, we can stop for now. And I'm planning to talk more with you about not only Wadi Fainan, but sites in Israel. And also I'm planning to talk with you about your underwater archaeology, because you're one of pioneers in underwater archaeology.
Well, I'm not a pioneer.
But you've done
Saeed, I'm not a
many projects. You've been in
yeah,
many
I'm not
projects.
a pioneer. You have to understand, I spent 40 years in the deserts of the Holy Land doing desert archaeology. But then it was getting very hot. So in my old age, I wanted to cool off. So that's why I do it.
Oh, we're going to continue our conversation, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and thank you for your interest, and thank you for the great job that you're doing in sharing Jordan's cultural heritage with the readers of the Jordan Times and other projects of yours.
Thank you so much, and we'll keep in touch. We'll continue our talk. All the best.
Sounds great. Okay, shukran jazilan.
Afwan.
Ma salam.